Grandma, I'm at the police station. Sabrina hit me, but she says I attacked her. Dad, he doesn't believe me. Liam's voice broke into pieces through the phone speaker, blending with the thudding footsteps of officers and the damp, cold air of 2:47 a.m. I stood barefoot on the kitchen's wooden floor, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. My son, Daniel, was inside that very building, yet he was siding with the second wife who had just turned my grandson into a juvenile offender. What they didn't know was this. I was not just a retired old woman. I used to be Inspector Marjorie Blake, the woman criminals in Chicago never wanted to see inside an interrogation room. Tonight, the gentle grandmother was coming back, and what Sabrina had just touched was not a weak child, but the last limit of my patience. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey, and if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I woke up fully in just 3 seconds. There was no transition between sleep and consciousness, only a jolt straight up as if someone had thrown ice water in my face. Liam, listen to my voice. Are you hurt? Is anyone next to you? I tried to sound as calm as possible, but my palms kept sweating. Liam inhaled shakily. Grandma, she hit me with the candle holder, but when Dad ran downstairs, she threw herself against the wall and said I attacked her. My heart dropped into my stomach. The candle holder. That wasn't something someone could mistake easily. It was heavy, sharp, and if used on someone's head, I closed my eyes for 1 second, then switched on the kitchen light. The white light cast my reflection onto the oven door glass. A small figure, messy silver hair, striped nightgown. But the look in my eyes was not that of a tired old woman. It was the familiar stare of Marjorie Blake before walking into an interrogation room. I'm coming right now. Don't say anything else to anyone. I tossed the phone onto the table, rushed into the bathroom, and splashed water on my face. In the mirror was me, 68 years old, crow's feet around my eyes, streaks of silver in my hair. But I knew very well, beneath this aging skin was still the woman who had taken down more crime rings than the combined fingers of dozens of young officers. I put on dark jeans, a gray turtleneck sweater, and the old wool coat I jokingly called my case-cracking coat. My black leather boots were worn at the soles but still sturdy. Last step, I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out an old brown wallet. Inside was my expired police badge. I no longer had legal authority, but sometimes that badge could open a few doors. I slipped it into the back pocket of my jeans, feeling as if I had just put on familiar armor again. Calling an Uber in the cold winter night of Chicago was always a challenge, but this time a car arrived in 4 minutes. The driver, an African-American man around 50, glanced at me in the rearview mirror and asked, "Ma'am, everything all right?" I simply answered, "My grandson needs me." That was enough. The car sped through misty streets, yellow streetlights stretching long shadows over the pavement. I leaned my head against the window, watching the city pass by, and couldn't help thinking about Daniel, the boy who once cried into my shoulder when his first wife left, the boy who once said I was the strongest woman in his life, and yet in just 5 years after Sabrina appeared, the wall between us had grown so thick. The calls became fewer. Family events where I was accidentally left out. Sabrina's soft phrases. Daniel needs private space. Liam needs to learn independence without relying on his grandmother. By the time I realized it, my son had already walked too far beyond my reach. The police station came into view with blue-white neon lights shining on the sign. I stepped inside, where the floor gleamed and the familiar smell of stale coffee drifted across the night shift. A young officer at the desk looked up, startled as I approached with purposeful steps. "I'm Marjorie Blake. I'm here to see my grandson, Liam Blake." His expression changed instantly. The kind of look young officers give a legend they'd only heard about in training. You're Inspector Blake? I mean, formerly? Yes. And where is my grandson?" He stammered, then quickly opened the door to lead me toward the back. As we walked down the hallway, the clicking of keyboards, the scent of paperwork, and the taut quiet reminded me of how little distance there was between retirement and the life I used to know. Captain Ross was standing by the coffee machine, his back slightly more stooped than before, but still commanding. When he turned and saw me, his eyes widened, then softened. "Marjorie, good grief, I didn't expect to see you at 2 a.m. I'm here for Liam." Ross's face fell. "I figured as much. We've got a domestic altercation. Sabrina Cole claims the boy pushed her down the stairs. The report says Liam behaved aggressively and Daniel..." "What did Daniel say?" I cut in. Ross sighed. "He signed to confirm Sabrina's statement. Liam is being held for review. Everything is stacked against him right now." I tightened my grip on my bag. "Ross, you know me. You know I wouldn't be here unless there was a reason." He was quiet for a few seconds, then opened a drawer, pulled out a thin file, and handed it to me. Inside were quick reports from the 2 night shift officers. Sabrina insisted she had feared for her safety for a long time, and Liam was described as an unpredictable teenager. I knew that phrasing. It was exactly how someone frames another person to hide their own guilt. "I need to see Liam and Daniel," I emphasized. Ross looked at me deeply, then gave a small nod, the nod of a man who owed me a few victories from the past. "All right, but only 10 minutes. When the waiting room door opened, I saw Liam curled up on a metal chair. The white bandage on his eyebrow stood out against his messy brown hair. He looked up as soon as he saw me, eyes red, filled with relief and fear. I didn't say a word. I opened my arms and hugged him tightly. Sweat, antiseptic, fear. They wrapped around me like a knife, but what sent a chill down my spine was when I looked up and caught Daniel's eyes through the glass, a distant, hardened gaze, as if I were an outsider interfering in his family affairs. And in that moment, I knew what we faced tonight was only the surface of something much uglier beneath. Liam was still shaking when I sat beside him. I placed a hand on his shoulder, waited for his breathing to steady, then said softly, "Tell me everything from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." He swallowed, staring at his dirt-stained shoes. "I got home around 10. Study group ran late. I walked in and the living room lights were off. I thought Dad was asleep." I nodded, not pushing him, letting him untangle the knots himself. "I was taking off my shoes when Sabrina switched the lights on. She said I came home late on purpose to provoke her, said Dad was tired of me. I didn't even get to explain before she grabbed the candle holder from the side table and..." Liam raised a hand to his temple, where the bandage covered the cut. "She hit me hard, Grandma. I got dizzy and fell against the wall." A chill ran down my spine. Sabrina knew how to choose timing, locations, and angles, the perfect ingredients for a fabricated story. What did she do next? She slammed her own shoulder into the wall, then started screaming. Dad ran down, saw her crying and holding her shoulder, and she said I went crazy because she scolded me and pushed her down the stairs. Pain stabbed my chest when Liam whispered the next part. Dad didn't look at my wound, didn't ask me anything. He ran to her first, then called the police. I squeezed Liam's hand. "You did the right thing by telling the truth. I'll take care of the rest." The door opened and Daniel entered with Ross. My son's face was exhausted, but his eyes were cold steel. I straightened my back. Daniel avoided looking at me, directing himself toward Liam first. "You can't talk to your stepmom like that. I already apologized to Sabrina for you. This ends when you admit you crossed the line." Liam looked down. I did not. "Daniel," I said, calm but sharp as a paper knife, "you think my grandson crossed the line? Have you looked at his injury?" Daniel frowned. "I don't want to argue here. Sabrina's shoulder is bruised. She said he pushed her down several steps. The officers wrote it down." I turned to Ross. "Have you inspected the scene?" Ross sighed. "We arrived when everything was over." Their statements matched, and Liam was too shaken to speak clearly. "He was shaken because he was hit in the head," I replied. Daniel clenched, his jaw. "You always think Sabrina and I are wrong. You never accepted her." I stared straight at my son, the boy who once hid behind me during scary movies, now believing a woman he'd known for a few years over his own mother. "Daniel," I said slowly, "I don't need to like Sabrina to know something is wrong. Look at Liam. Really look at him." Daniel turned away, refusing to meet his son's eyes. I knew nothing today would change his mind. People under manipulation manipulation rarely see the truth immediately. Ross stepped in, likely to prevent further argument. "Marjorie, you can take Liam home for now. I'll handle the paperwork, but this is temporary." I nodded. "Thank you." When Daniel left the room, Liam tugged lightly on my sleeve, as if afraid to do even that. "Grandma, Dad's so mad at me." I stroked his hair. "Your dad isn't mad at you. He's lost. That's different." An officer helped Liam sign the release. I draped my coat over him. His hoodie was stained with blood and dirt. We walked out of the station where the night wind bit through our clothes. Streetlights reflected off small puddles, and winter air filled each breath with coldness. When the taxi arrived, Liam pressed close to me, gripping the sleeve of my coat as if everything would collapse if he let go. I rested my hand on his back, not just to comfort him, but to remind myself he was still here, alive, after a blow that should never have happened. As the car drove, I watched the city pass by, skyscrapers fading in the rear view like silent witnesses. I thought of Daniel, the boy I taught to tie his shoes, to face failure, to love family. Now he was trapped inside an illusion Sabrina had crafted. I had met Sabrina's type countless times in my 35 years on the force. Charming, eloquent, keenly aware of others' weaknesses, and wielding them like weapons. People who made others feel chosen, when in truth they were only temporary pieces in a long-term plan. Sabrina didn't just want control in Daniel's house, she wanted assets. Power to remove anyone inconvenient to her goals, and Liam, honest but stubborn, was her biggest obstacle. When the taxi stopped in front of my building, Liam asked quietly, "Grandma, if they make me go back there, what do I do?" I bent down, looked into his eyes. "That will not happen, because from now on, I'm not taking my eyes off this." He nodded slightly, trembling but reassured. Inside my apartment, I flicked on the kitchen lights. Warm yellow filled the room. I told Liam to shower while I prepared the first aid kit. When I cleaned the cut on his brow, he winced, but didn't make a sound. "How hard did she hit you?" Liam whispered. "Hard enough that I thought I'd pass out." I clenched the cotton pad. Heat rose in my chest, but I took a deep breath. This wasn't the time for anger. It was time for data. I asked him about signs from the past 6 months: being locked, outside, belongings being smashed, threats, sudden nights when Daniel didn't want to be disturbed. Every detail matched the family manipulation patterns I had seen in dozens of old cases. I didn't tell Dad because I was scared. Scared he'd pull away from you and me even more, Liam said, voice trembling. I rested my hand over his. "I understand. But now that stops. From this minute on, you're not fighting alone." When Liam went to bed, I stayed in the kitchen, pulling out my old investigation notebook. Yellowed pages, scribbled case notes from years past. All of it awakened the part of me I had shelved after retirement. I unlocked my phone, scrolled through contacts until I reached a name I hadn't dialed in years. Nina Alvarez, former special investigator, trusted colleague, a woman whose instincts were sharper than a scalpel and whose mouth feared no one. I pressed call. The phone rang twice before Nina's raspy but alert voice answered. "Marjorie, you just dragged me out of bed at 3 a.m. What's going on? I need you. We're dealing with someone who knows how to fabricate stories, and I believe Sabrina didn't stop at framing Liam." Nina was silent for a few seconds, long enough for me to know she'd switched from sleepy to tactical mode. "Give me 2 days," she said. "I'll dig up her entire past. If there's something dirty, I'll find it." I hung up, leaned back, and looked toward the bedroom where Liam slept, breathing steady but tinged with fear. I told myself, Sabrina started this game, and I, Marjorie Blake, will be the one to end it. My third-floor apartment sat in a quiet working-class neighborhood on the west side of Chicago. The wooden stairs creaked under each step, and the mix of old paint and heater warmth gave it the familiar atmosphere I treasured. As soon as we walked in, Liam nearly collapsed onto the old moss-green sofa. He wrapped both hands around the mug of hot chocolate I'd made, covering part of his tear-stained face. I sat beside him, placing the first aid kit on the coffee table. "Let me check that injury," I whispered. Liam tilted his head to give me access. I removed the old bandage, examined the cut. It wasn't deep, but enough to cause dizziness and enough to make anger burn hot in my chest. I applied ointment, placed a fresh bandage, then handed him a pain reliever. "Take this, then drink a sip of water." Liam obeyed, exhaling shakily. I settled into the chair across from him, fingers interlocked. "Now tell me, what really happened these past 6 months? Don't leave anything out." Liam stared at me for a long moment, as if deciding whether to open up or stay silent like before. Then he set the mug down, his hands trembling slightly. "Grandma, Sabrina didn't just hit me for the first time." That sentence made every nerve in my body tighten. "Tell me clearly." "She locked me in the basement many times. Just because I talked a little too loudly or because I spilled a glass of water. Some days she locked me in for more than an hour. Dad was at work, so he didn't know." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Did you have your phone with you?" "No. She took it away. She said I bothered you all the time and that you would get tired of me. And she kept saying, 'Dad only loves her. He doesn't love me. He doesn't love you.'" I clenched my hands to hide my reaction. Liam continued, his voice turning hoarse. "She smashed my things and forced me to confess to Dad that I was rebellious. Every time that happened, Dad believed her. I was scared that if I told the truth, Dad would get even farther away from you and me." I inhaled deeply. A linear manipulator always starts by breaking down their target's self-esteem. Here, the target was a teenager still forming his sense of self. Sabrina knew he was the weakest link, and she attacked without mercy. "Is there anything else, Liam?" He hesitated, then whispered, "A week ago, I accidentally heard Sabrina talking on the phone in the kitchen. She didn't know I was standing behind the door. She said, 'When that old lady dies, Daniel will inherit the house. Selling it will get a few $100,000. Add the money I've saved, and that's enough to retire early.'" I froze for a few seconds. That house, the only house I ever bought after more than 30 years in the field, was what I planned to leave for Daniel and his son. A large asset, but more importantly, a symbol of my effort and my freedom. And Sabrina wanted Daniel to believe that ownership was already within reach once I was no longer alive. Not an accident, not a slip of the tongue. It was a plan. Liam continued. "She also said I was an obstacle. How could she rest if she had to support some kid?" His voice trembled, eyes glistening but trying not to cry. I stepped closer, sat beside him, and placed my hand on his shoulder. "Do you still have the photos of the bruises you mentioned before?" Liam nodded lightly. "I hid them in my phone. I didn't dare let Dad or Sabrina see them." "Show me." He unlocked his phone and opened a hidden folder. The photos appeared. Purple bruises on his shoulder, a long scratch on his arm, red marks around his wrist, as if someone had grabbed him hard. Evidence Sabrina clearly hoped would never be seen. "Send all of them to me," I said immediately. "Then delete everything from your phone." "Delete everything?" "Yes, we need 2 copies, one in my phone, one backed up on an external drive. No one can touch them." Liam did as I said, and as the photos transferred into my phone, I felt the air shift, as if the battle line had just been drawn clearly. Around 2 hours later, Liam began to collapse from exhaustion. I led him to my bedroom and pulled the blanket up to his shoulders. He looked at me in the darkness and whispered, "Grandma, don't let Sabrina come here." I stroked his hair. "No one can get in, I promise." When the door closed, I returned to the kitchen table and opened the old notebook I had carried through so many cases. The pages were yellowed, but the firm handwriting remained. Notes on behaviors, criminal patterns, relationship maps. I flipped to the page with the directory. Old names lined the page, most retired or moved out of state, but my eyes stopped at the one name that never made me hesitate. Nina Alvarez. I dialed. When the 3rd ring sounded, the other end picked up. "Marjorie, why are you calling at this hour?" Nina's voice was raspy but alert. "I need you." I said it directly without detours. "My grandson was framed. He has bruises, threats, and it looks like Sabrina has her eyes on my property. I suspect she's not a normal person." Nina was silent for a few seconds. I could hear her sigh, not from surprise, but from the instinct of someone who had investigated hundreds of cases. "Tell me everything," I explained. "How Sabrina hit Liam, staged the scene, Daniel signed the report, the bruises, the basement lock-ins, the remark about when that old lady dies, and Daniel's cold stare tonight. Finally, I said, I need to know who Sabrina really is. Nina replied in a low, decisive voice. Sounds like a Black Widow type. The kind of woman who targets men with assets, creates chaos, divides families, then profits. Give me 2 days, okay? I'll dig up her entire past for you. Won't miss a thing. I closed the notebook. Outside the window, dawn was approaching, and thin snowflakes had begun to fall. Good, I said. We'll need everything. And I knew from here on there was no turning back, only moving forward into the truth, no matter how dark it was. 2 days of having Liam with me passed in an unusual but comforting rhythm, a kind of peace the boy clearly had lacked for far too long. In the morning, I made pancakes the way Daniel liked them as a child, and Liam ate slowly but smiled more. We walked around the small park near my home. The cold wind reddened his cheeks, but his eyes were less shadowed. Still, every time my phone rang, Liam flinched. "Grandma, who do you think Dad will choose?" he asked cautiously. I answered softly, but truthfully. Your father is lost right now, but the truth eventually brings people back, sooner or later. Liam nodded, but the fear in his eyes didn't disappear. Sabrina had planted something in him far deeper than any bruise. By late afternoon of the second day, while I was folding Liam's clothes, the doorbell rang. I knew it was Nina. She never announced her arrivals. I opened the door and saw Nina standing there, her thick coat dusted with snow, her expression unusually heavy. In her hand was a thick file bound with a rubber band. "You should sit down," Nina said, wasting no time. I invited her into the kitchen and poured hot tea for both of us. Liam was in the living room, but I knew he could hear every word. I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Sit here. We'll listen together." Nina removed the rubber band and opened the file. Printed pages, photos, civil records. Everything spread before us like a map of truths I had sensed but never fully seen. Sabrina Cole, Nina began, is not a real name. Birth name, Sabrina Lewis. Born in Indiana. Mother left when she was 8. Father, an alcoholic. Poor household. Dropped out at 17. Drifted from bars to casinos. I wasn't surprised. A person's background doesn't determine guilt, but in this case, it explained her skill in reading people and surviving dangerous environments. Nina turned to the next stack of documents, and here are the 3 significant relationships. She placed before me a photo of a man around 50, with a gentle face and a soft belly. Hardware store owner, widower, died of a stroke 2 years after marrying Sabrina. No serious heart problems documented. Sabrina inherited a house worth $300,000. No suspicion back then because she played the role of a devoted wife. I touched the corner of the picture lightly, imagining Sabrina in mourning clothes, crying while neighbors pitied her grief. Nina slid another photo over, a well-dressed middle-aged businessman standing in front of a large house. This man fell down the stairs. Sabrina called 911, said he slipped. The home camera happened to be broken that week. Official report said accident. Sabrina received the full life insurance payout and the house in the suburb. I closed my eyes briefly. These perfectly timed accidents were all too familiar in my career. Nina held up the third photo, an older engineer, kind-looking. Beside it, a picture of a man in his 30s. Gentle smile, sad eyes. The father became depressed after the son left for another country. Sabrina was the only caretaker, and he handed over every asset to her. But in reality, Nina met my eyes, then slowly took out her phone and played a video. A man appeared on the screen. The same son in the photo, Ethan. He sat in a shabby rental room under a dim yellow light. His voice trembled but was clear. Harold and Sabrina forced me to sign papers to leave the country. They threatened to make me disappear for real if I told my father. I lived hiding for years. When I heard he died, I knew I'd been tricked. A chill ran from the base of my skull down my spine. Harold appearing again. Not a coincidence. Nina set the phone down. Harold O'Neill, estate attorney, handles wills, properties, offshore accounts. Almost every case with Sabrina has his fingerprints on it. He legitimizes every transaction. I flipped through more pages. House deeds, insurance papers, wedding photos of Sabrina in different hairstyles and outfits, but all with identical eyes, cold, empty, calculating, a smile in front of a wedding cake, a smile by a swimming pool, a smile beside an early death. Nina continued, women like her target widowers with adult children and large assets. If the children are obstacles, they get removed in ways no one suspects. Accidents, false accusations, or being pushed far away. I swallowed the tightness in my throat. Daniel, widowed nearly 7 years. Me, an elderly mother with a valuable house. Liam, a teenager who dared to see the truth. We all fit the pattern perfectly. I looked up at Sabrina in the third wedding photo, dark brown hair, pristine white dress, bouquet in hand, and realized that smile wasn't joy. It was a warning. I take what I want, and anyone in my way is just collateral. Liam had stayed quiet, but when he saw Ethan's haunted eyes in the video, he went pale. Grandma, does that mean I'm the next Ethan? I pulled him close, gripping his shoulder firmly. No, not as long as I'm here. I have let too many things slip through my fingers over the years, but not this. Liam rested his head against my shoulder, his whole body trembling. I knew that moment would stay with him, just as it would stay with me, the moment a child realized he had escaped a fate far darker than he imagined. Nina gathered the documents, her voice serious. We have the pattern, the precedent, a living witness, and Ethan's video testimony. Now we need one thing, Sabrina's confession, a brag, a slip. Anything. Exactly the kind of thing she tends to do. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers tapping the table. An old habit when strategizing. We'll make her talk. Nina raised an eyebrow. On camera? I nodded slightly. Yes, on camera. And before she realizes she chose the wrong family to mess with. Outside, the snow thickened, covering Chicago in a white blanket. But inside my small kitchen, the truth that had just come to light warmed a coldness I had carried for years. The coldness of watching my son be manipulated, my grandson abused, and my family dragged into a deadly game. Now it was clear. It was time to strike back. Learning Sabrina's past was only half the battle. I needed direct evidence for Liam's case, something no judge could ignore. Nina's files were strong but tied to the past, lacking the undeniable thread to the present. To protect Liam, I had to expose what Sabrina believed she had perfectly hidden. I had to make her reveal herself through words, actions, and the overconfidence common to those who think they're untouchable. That night, after Liam was asleep, Nina and I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. On the screen were countless spy camera models, button cameras, pen clips, outlet cameras, desk clocks, all smaller than a thumb. This one streams live 3-hour battery, Nina pointed. This one has clear audio and noise reduction, I said, turning to another page. We compared every feature and every resolution. This wasn't a game. Eventually, Nina circled a model, button camera style, perfectly hidden in fabric, HD quality, live streaming to 2 phones at once. Best in this price range, Nina said, sharp enough to capture every wrinkle on Sabrina's face. We ordered 2. When the confirmation appeared, I exhaled, as if laying the first stone of a path we couldn't turn back from. The plan took shape. Step 1. Liam had to return to the house that had caused him so much pain, not to confront anyone, but to retrieve his personal items, and more importantly, to find evidence that Sabrina had used violence. I called Daniel the next morning. Daniel, I kept my voice slow and gentle. Liam needs to come back for his books and clothes. He only has what he wore that night. Silence for a few seconds. Then Daniel answered with a trace of coldness. Tell him to be quick. Sabrina doesn't want to see him long. I closed my eyes, swallowing anger. It's still his home. Daniel didn't respond. He simply hung up. I set the phone down, my hand still trembling slightly. I had seen emotionally manipulated victims in many family cases, but watching my own son fall into that same void, nothing prepares you for that. The night before Liam returned to Daniel's house, I laid his light blue shirt on the table along with the 2 new button cameras. The kitchen lights reflected off the tiny metal pieces, making them look like silent eyes ready to record everything. "Come here," I called. Liam approached, hesitating slightly. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Are you sure you can do this?" He swallowed and nodded. "I'll do it for people like Ethan and for Dad." I didn't say anything more, but my chest tightened. Pride and fear tangled together. I carefully sewed the 2 special buttons along the front placket of Liam's shirt. "Remember what I told you," I said, tightening each stitch. "Take only your things. Don't touch anything else. If you see the candle holder, record and take photos only. Don't pick it up. If Sabrina shows any sign of violence, leave immediately. No arguing." Liam closed his eyes for a moment, then whispered, "Yes, Grandma." When I fastened the last button, I noticed Liam's hands were still shaking, but his eyes no longer held fear. They held the resolve of a child who had endured too much and decided he would endure no more. The day arrived faster than I expected. Nina drove. I sat in the back seat, phone open to the camera app. The feed from Liam's shirt appeared on the screen, slightly shaky but clear. "Can you hear me?" I tested. "Yes," he answered. Nina glanced in the rearview mirror. "You holding up?" "I've entered homes belonging to people worse than Sabrina," I replied, "but I've never been this scared. Sending Liam in there alone with her." The car stopped in front of Daniel's house. The familiar 2-story building, the lawn where Daniel used to teach Liam to throw a baseball, now lay cold under the snow. Liam stepped out, pulling his coat tight around his neck. I watched every step he took through the screen. The door opened. Sabrina appeared, and even through the camera, I could almost feel the bitterness in her voice. "Hurry up, you're not part of this family anymore." That sentence, sharp, venomous, and familiar, went straight into the screen and the microphone. Liam didn't answer. He lowered his head and walked in. The camera captured Sabrina's face, a smirk, eyes full of contempt. I clenched my jaw. People like her always think they stand one level above everyone else until the truth drags them down. Liam walked up the stairs. Light from the window spilled into his room, revealing everything clearly. The room was destroyed. Blankets thrown around, books scattered across the floor. The photo frame of Liam with his biological mother had been stepped on. The glass cracked. I heard Nina quietly curse beside me. As for me, it felt like someone squeezed my chest hard, not only because of the cruelty, but because Daniel had stood by and watched this happen without protecting his own child. Liam picked up a few books and put them into his bag. He didn't say anything, but through the camera, I saw his throat tighten as he tried to hold back his emotions. "Stay calm," I whispered. "Do everything exactly as planned." He opened the drawer under the desk. His hand stopped. The camera tilted down and I saw it. The silver candle holder, the metal still smeared with dry reddish-brown stains, the color of blood. I held my breath. "Record a close-up," I said quickly. "Don't touch it." Liam moved the button camera closer to the evidence. The image came through sharp, every detail undeniable. He took a few more angles. Then suddenly, from downstairs came Sabrina's shout, "Liam! What the hell are you doing up there?" I shot up from my seat, heart pounding. Nina gripped the steering wheel. "Oh God, it's starting!" On the screen, Liam straightened, hand gripping his backpack strap, breathing fast. "Leave the room," I whispered, unable to keep my voice steady. "Right now, Liam." He turned and walked toward the door. Just as Sabrina's silhouette appeared at the bottom of the stairs, her footsteps hitting the wooden floor hard. The air pulled tight like a wire. The dangerous game had begun. On the phone screen in my hand, Liam froze when he heard Sabrina yelling at the foot of the stairs. "What took you so long up there?" Her voice was sharp like a blade slicing through the air. Liam tightened his grip on the backpack strap to shield part of the camera, trying to stay calm. I was just packing my clothes," he answered, shaky but clear enough. I held my breath at every sound, every step Sabrina took as she moved upward. Liam quickly stuffed a few more personal things into the bag, careful not to do anything suspicious. He closed the drawer and headed down. When he reached the foyer, the camera shook slightly, then stabilized. Sabrina stood blocking the bottom of the stairs, arms crossed, eyes disdainful. "You're just a mistake your father had to put up with." Her voice released each word like she wanted them to cut into his skin. I heard Nina exhale sharply in the car, and I felt my blood heat in waves. Sabrina treated a child like garbage, and she dared to say it out loud. Liam stood taller, not bowing his head the way he used to. "I know you're planning to wait for my grandma to die so you can sell her house." The air felt stretched to the point of snapping. Both Nina and I almost leaned into the screen. Sabrina glared, stepped closer, her arrogant expression clearly captured by the lens. She leaned toward Liam's ear, her voice low but every word landing perfectly in the mic. "You think saying that scares me? All you have to do is step out of line and I'll put you in a reform school, understand? Your old grandma is about to die. What can she do? When she's gone, that house will belong to your father. I'll sell it. Move to Florida, open a motel, and you'll never see anyone again." I felt my entire body turn cold. Every word Sabrina spoke, exactly as Nina predicted, was an unfiltered confession. Bold, shameless, brutal. Right then, the front door swung open. Daniel walked in, his work coat still on. He stopped short when he heard the last parts. "Reform school, sell your mother's house, the old lady is about to die." His face showed confusion, stunned like he didn't understand what he had just walked into. "Sabrina, what are you saying?" Daniel asked, his voice dry. Sabrina instantly turned, her expression changing in one heartbeat like a trained actress. Eyes watery, voice trembling, hands shaking as they touched Daniel's shoulder. "You're home. You don't understand. Liam is making things up. He threatened me. I was only defending myself. If I hadn't seen hundreds of women act exactly like that in interrogation rooms, I might have believed her." But Daniel's eyes flickered with doubt. And at that moment, Liam's button camera captured everything. The hesitation, the confusion, and something like fear. "Liam," Daniel turned to his son, his voice flat. "Get out of the house, now." "But get out of the house." Daniel almost shouted, his cold eyes shutting down every chance of conversation. Watching that through the camera felt like being stabbed. Liam was silenced the moment he tried to tell the truth. Daniel, my son, still chose to stand with the woman who was destroying his family. Liam looked down, fighting tears but failing. He walked straight to the door, the camera shaking as he hurried down the steps. Nina opened the car door before I could speak. Liam ran into my arms and burst into tears, not from pain, but from helplessness, from being rejected in his own home. I held him tightly, my hand smoothing his hair the way I did when he was little. "You did so well," I whispered. "Perfect. We have everything. Her threats, her plan, and the video of the candle holder." Nina nodded, firm and calm. "The finishing blow Sabrina gave herself is the last phone call." That night, after Liam was safely asleep in my room, I replayed the entire recording. There was a part where Sabrina turned her back and walked into the kitchen, her cold voice echoing as she dialed the phone. "Harold, listen. We need to speed things up. That old woman won't know what's happening. I need the paperwork ready to transfer the house to Daniel soon. Don't fall behind." Each word pulled back the final curtain, exposing her entire dirty scheme. I turned off the screen and stepped onto the balcony. Chicago was cold that night, the yellow light stretching along the streets like tired veins. I rested my hands on the railing, took a deep breath, and forced my emotions down. Daniel, my only child. I had always hoped that with enough time, he would break free of Sabrina's manipulation. But after today, I knew I had lost Daniel, at least for now. Admitting that felt like a knife, but it also sharpened something inside me. If I didn't save Liam, if I didn't expose Sabrina, my entire family would be pulled into the dark. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that once cuffed criminals, held victims, and carried my young son as he slept. Those hands now had to do something even harder, detox the whole family, and I would do it no matter which side Daniel stood on. The next morning, while Liam was still asleep, Nina and I sat again at the kitchen table, the place that had witnessed hundreds of investigation meetings throughout my decades-long career. But this time, the subject wasn't a street criminal or a smuggler. It was the woman who had slipped into our family like a poisoned needle. Phase 2, I said, opening my old investigation journal. "We need to make Sabrina believe you've given up." Nina nodded, eyes bright. And that you're ready to sign the house transfer. The plan sounded simple, but to trap Sabrina, every detail had to be flawless. I called my old lawyer friend, David Merritt, a man who had handled hundreds of estate cases. I didn't explain everything, only said I needed paperwork to gift the house to Daniel while still alive. David understood immediately, but added a hidden clause. If there was evidence the giver was coerced or threatened, the contract would be void instantly. "You're sure you want to go this hard?" David asked. "I'm sure." "Good. Then I'll prepare a no-error set of documents. Looks legal at a glance, but carries a legal trap." I smiled. David was the only person I trusted to lay the foundation for this step. In my apartment, I placed a few things that looked like they were accidentally left out. A stack of fake hospital bills sticking out of a drawer, a box of heart medication on the dining table, a half-finished glass of water beside a crumpled tissue, as if I had a rough night breathing, all to create the image of a frail, exhausted old woman with no strength left to fight. Nina looked around and let out a half laugh. "If you ever go into acting, Hollywood will sign you immediately." I waved her off. "When your child is threatened, any mother knows how to act." At noon, I called Daniel. "Daniel, I want to speak with Sabrina." My voice had to sound tired, shaking, like someone who had finally given up. I had heard hundreds of suspects perform, but this time I was the one acting. Daniel handed the phone to her. Sabrina answered, her voice dry. "What do you want?" I want to end the war," I said, making sure to let a long sigh slip out. "If you drop the petition against Liam, I'll sign the house over to Daniel. I don't want to take this mess to my grave." Silence on the other end. I could hear Sabrina swallowing. When I added, "The house will sell for a few $100,000. Leaving it to you two, I'll feel at ease." Her voice instantly changed, full of excitement, almost unable to hide it. "Then let me talk to my lawyer. We'll come to your place to sign quickly." "All right, I just want peace. I don't have the strength for court," I said, pressing on her greed and overconfidence. When I hung up, Nina dropped onto the chair. "You just hit her weak spot perfectly." We chose my apartment for the meeting, a small space but friendly enough to make Sabrina believe I had surrendered fully. Nina spent the afternoon turning the place into a seamless trap. A camera hidden in the bookshelf, one in the salt and pepper shakers on the dining table, one inside the floor lamp, one in the vent by the living room ceiling, all positioned to capture her face, her voice, and with 2 backup streams in case Sabrina damaged anything. Even the audio recorder in the wall outlet was already set. Liam was sent to Nina's friend's house. I didn't want him facing Sabrina again when he was still too vulnerable. And more than that, I needed perfect focus for my performance. When Nina left to avoid suspicion, I stayed alone in the apartment. I walked slowly around the living room, where I had read stories to Daniel when he was 4, where my husband and I once ate dinner, where I had hung the picture from Liam's first birthday. The evening light hit the walls, coating everything in a thin layer of time. "You think I'm your final prey, Sabrina?" I whispered. "But today is the last day you hunt." I took a long breath, adjusted my scarf, and placed David's fake documents on the table. On top were a few asset declaration pages, looking exactly like something an old woman would prepare before she passed away. At exactly 5 p.m., the doorbell rang. My heart beat twice, not from fear, but from the familiar adrenaline of an important confrontation. I opened the door. Sabrina stood in front, a fitted business dress, red lips, eyes lit up like someone who just smelled money. Beside her was Harold, black suit, holding a file case as if he were about to sign a major property deal. And behind them, Daniel, his face tense, eyes sunken, looking like someone dragged here rather than someone who came willingly. I stepped aside, offering a faint smile. "Come in. I want to get this over with." The 3 of them walked into the apartment, each step, each breath echoing in the silence that felt heavy enough to crush bone. None of them knew they had just stepped into the web I had already spun, each thread held tight by truth, by law, and by the resolve of a grandmother protecting her family from the most dangerous predator I had ever encountered. The game was only truly beginning now. I invited all three to sit at the small dining table where I had deliberately placed a pot of freshly brewed coffee. I let my hand tremble as I poured, letting the coffee slosh over the rim, a small detail but necessary for Sabrina to believe I was slipping. I'm old, I sighed, wiping the spill with a tissue. I just want my family to have peace. Sabrina leaned back in her chair as if victory had already been framed and hung on the wall. Daniel lowered his head to stare at the tabletop, while Harold opened his file case, looking like an old crow preparing its meal. Harold spread out all the documents and explained each clause in a slow, simple voice, the kind used when speaking to an elderly person in decline. "This is an unconditional gift," he emphasized. "Sign here, and the house belongs to Daniel immediately. No one can dispute it." I nodded weakly. The camera inside the floor lamp captured every line on Harold's face. "I just want Liam to have the charges dropped," I said, letting my voice shake. "He's not a bad kid. He's only 14. Sabrina folded her arms, shooting a blade-sharp look. "Fine, but he needs to keep his mouth shut. If he makes up anything else, I'm not protecting him." Daniel flinched. Sabrina didn't even look at him. Her words came out naturally, the reflex of someone used to controlling others. I lowered my head, pretending to be hurt, while actually noting every micro-expression on their faces. All the cameras captured it perfectly. I continued baiting the trap. "Since you came, Daniel has lived for himself more," I said softly. "He's not controlled by his mother anymore." Exactly as expected, Sabrina flipped her hair and gave a small, triumphant smile. "Of course," she said. "He used to be, what's the word, overly sheltered." Sabrina began listing things, as if unable to resist bragging. That birthday when she accidentally booked a place without enough space for me. Christmas when she forgot to send the invitation. Summer break when she scheduled their Florida trip exactly the week I planned to visit. "I just want Daniel to be free," Sabrina said, lifting her chin. "Free from toxic ties." I looked at Daniel. The color on his face slowly shifted. Things he once believed were coincidences suddenly took shape. The stench of Sabrina's manipulation rising thick in the air. The camera caught that expression. I just needed one more push. "Oh," I said, deliberately absent-minded. "The candle holder, I still have it. The place where what happened with Liam occurred. Maybe I should throw it away so it doesn't haunt me." Sabrina let out a sharp, careless laugh. "Why would you keep that? I still have to steer the story so the police believe it." Harold almost jumped out of his seat. "Sabrina," but Sabrina brushed his hand away, her eyes flicking at Daniel in challenge as she continued, completely unaware that her voice was being captured clearly by 4 cameras and the audio recorder in the outlet. "The kid only has to cry a little, and everyone believes him. I had to straighten him out so he'd know his place. This old woman is about to die anyway. The house will be in your name soon, and we'll move to Florida and open that motel. God, Daniel, I told you. As soon as we get Liam thrown into a reform school, we can finally live in peace." Daniel's mouth fell open, his face turning pale. I looked at my son, no longer with anger, only with a hopelessness mixed with heartbreak. He had loved blindly a woman who saw him and his son as nothing but chess pieces. I stood. The trembling vanished, replaced by the voice of Inspector Marjorie Blake, the voice that once made criminals shake in their cuffs. "Sabrina Cole, or Sabrina Lewis, or whichever name you've used." The whole room went silent. I turned toward the bedroom door. "Nina." The door opened. Nina stepped out, holding a laptop connected to all 4 camera angles. I continued, slow and sharp. "This entire conversation has been recorded and audio captured legally, with a witness present." Sabrina's face drained of color. She staggered back. Harold's eyes widened, mouth opening like a suffocating fish. Daniel grabbed his head, unable to believe what he had just heard his own wife say. I pressed a familiar sequence of numbers. "Captain Ross?" "Yes, it's me, Blake." I looked straight at Sabrina as I continued. "If you're free, swing by my place for coffee. I have some special guests the Chicago Police Department might like to take home." I hung up. The room thickened with silence, broken only by Sabrina's panicked breathing, Harold's trembling, and Daniel's choked sob as truth finally slapped him in the face. I stood there, not triumphant, not vengeful, just strangely at peace. The truth had become the knife, and this time, it didn't cut my family. It cut the one who had poisoned our lives for the past 2 years. Captain Ross arrived so quickly, I hadn't even cleared the cold coffee cups on the table. The door opened. The hallway's cold air swept in, followed by 2 young officers and Ross's calm but commanding presence. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on Sabrina, pale, and Harold, sweating like he'd run through a blizzard. "Marjorie," Ross nodded. "Show me the video." Nina handed him the laptop. A few minutes of footage was enough. The threats, the admissions of violence, the plan to seize assets, and Sabrina's phone call to Harold. Ross closed the laptop and turned to Sabrina. "Miss Sabrina Lewis, you are under arrest for suspected child abuse, conspiracy to seize assets, multiple counts of fraud, and falsifying testimony. You have the right to remain silent." "No!" Sabrina screamed, as if yelling could erase the evidence. "They set me up. That old woman, she rigged everything. Daniel, say something." Ross continued reading her rights as if her shrieks didn't exist. When he pulled out the cuffs, Sabrina thrashed, only making herself look like a cornered animal. Daniel stood frozen, arms limp, eyes wide. When the cuffs clicked shut, I saw Daniel step back half a pace, as if a final door he'd been hiding behind had just been ripped open. Harold, on the other hand, didn't scream. He didn't fight. He shook so badly he looked ready to faint. Wait, he stammered. "I want to cooperate with the prosecutor. I'll confess everything. I didn't do anything. I just handled the legal work." Ross raised an eyebrow. "You can tell that to the prosecutor, not me." Another officer stepped in and cuffed Harold quickly and cleanly. Sabrina turned to Daniel, eyes wild with desperation and anger. "Look at me. Are you really letting them take me? I did everything for you, for us." Daniel stood there, unable to form a single word, and for the first time I saw him clearly, a man who had finally woken up, but far too late. As they were led out, Daniel turned to me, lips trembling, voice raw from shock. "Mom, I didn't know anything. I swear, I didn't know she did these things." I looked him in the eye. "You didn't sign the papers. You didn't hit Liam, but you stood by and watched." The sentence hit Daniel like a hard gust of wind, making him sway. I continued, soft but sharp. "You carry that with your son, not with me." Daniel lowered his head, shoulders collapsing, and I knew he finally felt the weight of the years he had been cruelly silent toward his own child. The next day, Harold started talking. No one had to push him. He was so terrified of prison, his teeth chattered. His files included every case where Sabrina's previous husbands died. Suddenly, the hardware store owner, the businessman who fell down the stairs, the elderly engineer who spiraled into depression, the money transfers to offshore accounts Harold set up to clean the funds. A 50-50 agreement between him and Sabrina. Every asset seized, every insurance payout, every house sold, they split evenly. The story of forcing Ethan out of the country, plus an audio file Harold kept just in case, where Sabrina threatened him, "Get out, and don't let me see your face again." The documents were thick enough to stack into a small tower on the prosecutor's desk. When Ethan was contacted, he almost cried over the phone because someone finally believed he wasn't an ungrateful son who abandoned his father. And he wasn't the only one. Relatives, neighbors, even hospital staff who had suspected the deaths were ready to testify. The picture of the Black Widow was no longer speculation. It was clear, every detail sharp. For days, Nina and I worked at the prosecutor's office. We pieced together every part of Sabrina. Old statements, property sale papers, insurance contracts, timelines matching each unexpected death with her presence. The video of Sabrina bragging in front of me. The investigation team looked at me with a respect I hadn't felt in years. Even retired during those days, I became Inspector Blake again, the woman who once kept criminals awake at night. Liam Liam sometimes sat beside me at the office, doing homework or reading. He didn't talk much, but his eyes brightened whenever I explained why a certain piece of evidence mattered, or why a witness statement was the final puzzle piece. One evening, as I walked him home, Liam asked quietly, "Grandma, Sabrina wasn't just a mean stepmother, right?" I paused. "No, sweetheart. She was a real criminal, and you were very brave." Liam nodded, as if a heavy stone in his chest had finally found the right place to rest. Then one day Daniel called me, his voice tired and tight, like he had just lost a part of himself. "Mom, I want to see you." I met him at the small park below my building. When I arrived, Daniel wasn't standing, wasn't sitting. He was kneeling right in front of me. He broke down crying. "I'm sorry, Mom, I'm so sorry. I let Liam suffer. I was so stupid." I stepped back, not out of anger, but because too many emotions hit at once. "Daniel," I said his name the way you call a lost child. "No apology fixes the past. Only what you do now fixes the future for you and for Liam." He choked out, "I'll do everything. I swear. I'll testify. I'll protect him." I nodded, not forgiving, not condemning. Forgiveness is a long journey. But Daniel kneeling that day was step one. The court date was set not long after. The day I received the notice, I stood by my apartment window watching snow fall over Chicago's rooftops. Part of me, the part that had lived for justice, felt anticipation. The evidence, the statements, the pieces Nina and I had worked so hard to gather were finally going to see daylight. But another part of me, the mother, felt a pain, like someone squeezing my heart. Because in that courtroom, it wasn't only Sabrina and Harold being brought into the light. There was also Daniel, my son, sitting in the witness chair with guilt in his eyes, forced to see clearly how he had been manipulated and how he had unintentionally hurt his own child. Justice has its own light. But sometimes that light is so bright that a person has to shut their eyes just to keep from crying. On the day of the trial, Chicago felt colder than usual. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the heavy gray air made the whole city seem to hold its breath. I knew the reason. Sabrina's case had attracted the press for weeks. A young, beautiful woman who appeared kind to her neighbors, but behind that facade were a string of unusual deaths, disappearances, assets transferred under suspicious circumstances. All of it made the case the center of attention. The moment I stepped out of the car, I saw a long line of reporters outside the courthouse, microphones and cameras raised. Questions pelted us like hail. "Mrs. Blake, do you believe Sabrina is a murderer? Is this the biggest Black Widow case in the last 3 decades? What kind of sentence are you hoping for?" I simply placed my hand gently on Liam's shoulder and led him through the main doors, leaving everything behind us. Children don't need to carry the noise of the adult world. The courtroom was packed. Liam, Daniel, and I sat in the front row, right behind the prosecution's table. Behind us were Nina, Ross, and several officers who had helped during the investigation. I looked at Daniel. He wore a light blue dress shirt, his tie slightly crooked. He was noticeably thinner, his eyes sunken, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Even without words, I knew Daniel saw today as a chance to reclaim at least part of what he had lost. Across the room, Sabrina entered. Gone were the elegant office dresses and soft curls. She wore an orange inmate uniform, her wrists cuffed in front. Her face was gaunt, but her eyes were the same, glaring, venomous, as if she were the one who'd been betrayed rather than the person who had wrecked the lives of multiple families. We looked at each other for 1 second. I didn't feel triumph, only the collapse of a soul that had rotted long ago. The prosecutor began by laying out a pattern as clear as the lines on a palm. Sabrina sought out widowers or older, wealthy men. She quickly gained their trust and slipped into their marriages. Then came a series of accidents, falls downstairs, sudden strokes, emotional breakdowns. The victims' children either disappeared from the picture or had their reputation reputations destroyed through lies. And it always ended the same. Assets flowing to Sabrina and Harold through layers of offshore accounts. I listened and shivered, even though I already knew every detail. Hearing the prosecutor present, it was like watching someone place stone after stone onto a grave, and that grave belonged to Sabrina's freedom. Then Ethan was called to the stand. His hands trembled as he held the microphone. His hair was unkempt, his eyes swollen from years of suffering, and from this moment, his first chance to speak the truth. "She gave me pills," Ethan began, voice raw. "I woke up in a strange room. My passport was gone. I was warned. If I tried to contact my father, I would truly disappear." The entire courtroom seemed to stop breathing. Ethan spoke of years spent hiding, living in cheap dormitories, afraid to use his real name. When he learned his father had died, he knew Sabrina had succeeded in cutting him off forever. As Ethan stepped down, I saw Ross grip his pen so tightly his knuckles whitened. Then it was my turn. The prosecutor questioned me as both a victim and a former detective. That title caught in my throat for a moment. I had once been the one pursuing criminals, not the one threatened by them. I spoke about Liam, his stitched eyebrow, the night he called me at 2 a.m. with a shattered voice. I spoke about the 5 years in which Daniel slowly became a shadow of himself, the empty Christmases, the birthdays forgotten under convenient excuses. I said that abuse is not only bruises or blows. Abuse is also how Sabrina severed trust, how she dismantled the bonds of a family, one thread at a time. I looked toward Daniel. He bowed his head, his shoulders shaking. Then came Sabrina's turn. She stood straight, eyes blazing, her voice shrill. "I am innocent. This is jealousy from people who can't stand that men choose me. My mother-in-law," she shot me a glare, "has always been envious. They made everything up to ruin me." The courtroom fell utterly silent, as if the air had been sucked out. The judge lowered his eyes briefly, setting down his pen. An innocent person does not lash out at the entire world. When Sabrina finished, the judge rose. His voice was calm but sharp as a scalpel. "Defendant Sabrina Lewis has shown no remorse. She treats people as tools for extraction, victims as profit. Each death, each disappearance, each suffering was merely a step in her plan to enrich herself." He paused, staring directly at her. "That is why society must be protected from you for a very long time." The entire room waited for the sentence, breathless. Defendant Sabrina Lewis is hereby sentenced to over 30 years for large-scale fraud, 20 years for abuse and injury of a minor, 10 years for conspiracy to extort assets, additional consecutive sentences for kidnapping and forcing Ethan out of the R country, total, a sentence nearly equal to a lifetime. Her assets were seized to compensate the victims' families. Harold received a reduced sentence for cooperating, but he was still imprisoned, stripped of his legal license, and banned permanently from handling legal documents. As 2 officers escorted Sabrina out, she snapped her head toward Daniel, her face twisted with raw hatred. "You know something? I took you away from that old woman for 5 whole years," she screamed, wrenching against the officers like a wild animal. But this time, Daniel did not stand frozen. He turned and wrapped Liam in his arms. "I'm here now," he whispered. His voice shook, but it was firm. Standing behind them, I watched as the final wound began to close. Not perfectly, not immediately, but it had begun. When we stepped outside, reporters surged forward again. Microphones, cameras, rapid-fire questions. One asked, "Mrs. Blake, do you have a message for people going through something similar?" I held Liam's hand, lifted my chin, and said slowly, clearly, "Justice doesn't always come quickly, but if you don't let go, one day it will stand with you." Then I pulled Liam into my arms. At long last, after years swallowed by darkness, my little family had finally seen the light. After the trial, the atmosphere in my family felt as if it had grown a new layer of skin. There were still the bruised patches of the past, but at least they no longer bled. Daniel was the first to make an important decision, to sell the old house. "I can't live there for even one more day," he said, his voice firm but tired. I understood. That house had once been a home, but gradually it became the trap Sabrina used to tear us apart. Those walls held too many shouts, too many moments when Liam cried, too many empty spaces where Daniel stood watching without protecting his child. When the house was sold, Daniel divided the money into 3 parts. One part for Liam, which he said was his first act of making things right. One part contributed to the compensation fund for Sabrina's victims as a way to put a clear end to the past. One part for him to rebuild his life, this time in a small apartment a few blocks from mine, close enough to walk over. I didn't say it aloud, but inside I felt as if a portion of the burden I had carried for years had finally been set down. Liam officially moved in with me. Daniel didn't object. He even seemed relieved knowing his son was in a safe environment. He rented a new apartment, small but bright, with an old blue sofa that he said was for the 2 of us to watch soccer together. In the early days, Daniel tried to be present in ways he hadn't been for years. He took Liam to school, picked him up, showed up at the game where Liam played as a starter for the first time, sat and listened when Liam talked about a math test or the worry when a classmate stopped speaking to him. He didn't try to play the role of a perfect father. He simply tried to be there, and sometimes that alone is a revolution. But between father and son, there were still heavy moments, like a sky about to storm. One evening, as Daniel was preparing dinner, Liam suddenly slammed his plate on the table. "Where were you for 5 years? Do you know how scared I was? Do you know I thought you didn't love me anymore?" Daniel froze. No excuses, no blaming. Finally, he said, "I'm not asking you to forgive me today. I'm only asking to try again, one day at a time, if you'll let me." I stood in the kitchen, hands paused over the sink, watching them, one trying to swallow his anger, one trying not to cry. I understood that no matter how well I fought, Liam needed something only his father could give, responsibility and closeness. In that moment, I felt lighter, as if my shoulders finally relaxed after years of being the only shield. One afternoon, I received a letter from prison. The sender, Sabrina. The first line alone carried the stench of poison. "You should remember, for the past 5 years, I took Daniel away from you. The rest was nothing but bitterness, arrogance, cruel comparisons, and a final threat. I won't forget you," as if she still lived in that twisted world where she was the victim of everyone else. I folded the letter, tore it into tiny pieces, and dropped them into the trash. It was the last piece of the past I no longer wished to keep in any form. Time passed, light and steady like a June breeze. In the evenings, the 3 of us gathered around the dining table. We talked about school, Daniel's part-time work, our walks in the park, and the nights we stayed up late watching soccer together. Sometimes it was just sharing a slice of pizza or arguing over which team played better. Simple things. Yet for my family, after so many years of rupture, luxuries. Liam began smiling more. Daniel began sleeping more deeply. And I began to believe that time was still wide enough for healing. One day, Daniel came to my home with a stack of papers. I'm going to therapy, he admitted, slightly embarrassed. I want to understand why I was so easily controlled by her. I don't want to repeat this cycle. I looked at him for a long moment. In his eyes, I saw the son I once raised. Someone who used to distinguish right from wrong as clearly as black from white, but who had been warped by loneliness, regret, and the sense of failure after his first wife passed away. "You're doing the right thing," I said, placing my hand on his shoulder. "Not everyone dares to face their own darkness." Daniel bowed his head, and for the first time in years, he let his tears fall without trying to hide them. Liam changed as well. From a frightened child who jumped at every knock on the door, he grew more confident. He talked about his dreams for the future, no longer haunted by the image of a reform camp Sabrina had used to silence him. He talked about his favorite class, his new friend Marcus, and Sunday's soccer match. I looked at him and thought, this child walked through fire and still kept his gentle heart. I felt myself aging. Each morning, my knees stiffened a little more. My breath shortened. but I no longer carried the feeling of being erased by my own son. Instead, I saw a man learning how to be a father again, a child growing in safety, and a family slowly piecing itself back together. One evening, while I was washing dishes, Liam sat at the kitchen table, his chin resting on his hand as he looked out the window where the streetlights glowed on a thin layer of snow. "Grandma," he said in a voice deeper and more mature than his age, "do you know what I want to be when I grow up?" I wiped my hands and sat beside him. "Let me guess. A baseball player." Liam shook his head, giving a small smile. "I want to study law. I want to protect kids no one believes." He looked up at me. "Like you believed me." I froze for a moment, then pulled him into my arms. Not because I was emotional, but because I was grateful life had returned to Liam the future Sabrina almost stole. And because finally, after years of fighting, I understood. It wasn't me who saved Liam. It was his own resilience that saved our entire family. Time has its own way of soothing wounds, slow, patient, and sometimes so quietly that I hardly noticed when everything in my family began to warm again. Liam went off to college at 18 carrying a heavy backpack, a mature smile, and a heart that understood justice more deeply than most people his age. He chose to study law, just as he once whispered to me on a peaceful evening. "I want to protect kids like I used to be. I want to speak for the ones no one believes." In his first year, Liam joined a legal aid club for teenagers, taking small cases, kids bullied by classmates, ignored by guardians, or labeled troublemakers simply for telling the truth. I saw a version of myself at 30 in him. Not the toughness, but the refusal to tolerate even the smallest injustice. Daniel had stabilized by then. He worked for a community counseling center. The salary wasn't high, but he said it made him feel useful. More importantly, he began a new relationship, healthy, steady, and free from the shadows of control or paranoia. The first time I met the woman, I saw kindness and sincerity in her eyes. I was happy for Daniel, but I set a clear boundary for myself. I no longer interfered in his personal life. I simply held the role I could best fulfill, a mother who didn't judge, didn't accuse, and didn't sacrifice herself to the point of losing who she was. I returned to the quiet rhythm of a retired woman, though not entirely detached from what had once defined me, justice, and the ability to protect others. A fund supporting victims of family fraud invited me to join their advisory board. At Haitya, the first meeting, I walked in with my silver hair tied neatly and a stack of documents in my arms. Immediately, a few young volunteers whispered, "Is that Mrs. Blake? She looks kind of strict." But when I began sharing investigative methods, offshore tracing techniques, and ways to interview suspects so liars expose themselves, one of them laughed. "She is strict, but she's really straightforward. I like her." From then on, I became the straight-shooting old lady everyone appreciated. I didn't teach them how to fight criminals. I taught them how to see the thin little trail that leads to the truth, the very thing Sabrina once believed no one was sharp enough to find. One year after Sabrina's sentencing, a group of her former victims, including Ethan, the daughter of the elderly engineer, and the ex-wife of the hardware store owner, created a small fund together. They gave it a symbolic name, but they sent me a letter, "Mrs. Blake. Thanks to your persistence, we escaped the web of crimes Sabrina spun for years. We want this fund to bear the imprint of the woman who bravely followed each thread." My eyes stung as I read it, not from pride, but from knowing that people who once felt buried by silence and shame had finally found their voices. My family also had its own small symbol, the cherry tree planted at the corner of the park near home. On the day of the verdict, the three of us, Daniel, Liam, and I, brought a shovel and a bag of seeds and planted that tree into the cold ground. I remember Liam staring at it for a long time before asking, "Will it survive, Grandma? Winters here are really cold." "It will," I said. "Beauty often grows from the things that have been hurt the most." Now every spring that cherry tree blooms, not bright, not large, just small, pale pink blossoms, but enough to remind us that life can rise again from its deepest fractures. One summer afternoon, Daniel invited me and Liam to the park for an outdoor meal. He lit the small grill while Liam arranged a plate of fruit. The sun dipped low, casting warm, honey-colored light over the grass, making everything look peaceful and golden like a postcard. "I have something for you," Daniel said, handing me a photo album. I opened it, each page a piece of the past 3 years. Liam receiving his scholarship, Daniel hugging his son after the first game where they reconciled, all of us smiling under the cherry tree when it bloomed for the first time. Another picture, me standing between them, my face lined but my eyes bright. On the last page was a handwritten note from Daniel. "Thank you, Mom, for not giving up on us." I rested my hand on that page so long, Liam teased, "Grandma, don't cry. I didn't bring tissues." I laughed, though my chest felt full to the brim. I will not live forever. I know that better than anyone. Age arrives softly but firmly, not letting me run fast, climb high steps, or crouch long to play, ball with my grandson. But I have come to realize this: the greatest legacy a person leaves is not a house, money, or keepsakes. It is the values they leave with those who continue living. I fought for the truth. Now Liam will fight for children like himself. Daniel will rebuild his life with kindness and insight. The former victims will move forward without shame. All of these, big or small, trace back to one decision I made the night Liam called at 2 a.m., not to give up. And now, speaking to you, the person listening to my story, I have only one message to offer. Never let anyone make you doubt the people who truly love you, especially when they use that very love to control you. Life is not always clear. Often the deepest wounds come from those within our own homes. But if we stay rooted in truth, compassion, and what is right, then eventually the light finds its way back. If you're watching this story from a small apartment, a nursing home, or a quiet house where old memories haven't fully healed, I want you to know you are not alone. There are people out there who have lived through injustice within their families, who have been misunderstood, overlooked, or forced to stand alone in the dark. I would be grateful if you shared a little in the comments below. Where are you from? Which city? Which country? Have you ever witnessed an injustice that stayed with you? Thank you, truly, for sitting with me through this long journey. Every like, every comment is like a seat at my little kitchen table where I tell stories and you listen. If you believe in justice, in second chances for families, and in the power of truth, please like, subscribe, and stay for the next stories. Because sometimes all it takes is one story at the right moment for someone out there to find the courage to stand up and protect themselves.